welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here and listening in. My name is Estefania. I work for Reach. Reach is a developer platform made to make blockchain more accessible. So we're going to kick off with just kind of having everyone introduce themselves and tell me a little bit about what you do and your background. So I'll start with you, JJ.
Okay. I am the head of applied research at Algorand, and what that really means is that I work on improving our smart contract platform by taking ideas that come out of our research teams and moving them into our engineering teams and getting things going that way. My background is that I used to be a professor at Brown. I taught things like networking and operating systems-oriented classes. I started a company called Foodler, which oddly enough started accepting Bitcoin in 2013. So that was my first bit of blockchain connection. But then I ignored it for a long time. Eventually sold that company. Soon after that, I joined up with Algorand because it sounded like really interesting technology. And I could start doing some things, well, I thought it would be fun.
Right, I'm Kenyon. I work at Algorand with JJ. I work as a product manager, and my focus is really on the developer experience. So JJ brings the idea from the research side, I bring the ideas from our developer users side. In my background, I studied computer science, more on the theory side, and then I worked as an engineer for a little while at a place called Virgin Pulse, so health and wellness tech, and that's where I grew into a product manager role, and then sort of just happened into Algorand about a year ago. That's me.
Cool. Howdy, everyone. I'm Jay McCarthy. I'm the founder and the co-founder and CTO of Reach. As Estefania mentioned, we're a developer platform. My background is that I did a PhD at Brown. In fact, JJ was on my master's committee. And I finished that a long time ago. So for the last 16-ish years, I've been a professor of computer science. I was at Brigham Young University and then at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. I threw away tenure about 23 days ago. And now I'm fully invested in the blockchain world.
Yeah, excellent. Hi, everybody. My name's Nick Stanford. I am the developer experience lead at Reach. I am a software engineer, and I study at Arizona State University. And at Reach, I'm responsible for everything relating to the developer experience. How do our users come to Reach? How do they learn? And then coordinating and actually running the programs and teaching the programs to help users go from Web 2 programming to Web 3 programming in as little as 12 weeks. And that's my primary focus. It's what I do every single day for Reach, and I absolutely love my job.
I can attest, Nick is very good at his job, and very grateful to be on this panel with all of you intelligent folk. I'm really excited for this conversation because I think we talk about sustainability a lot, especially when we think about Algorand being the greenest blockchain. But there's other aspects of sustainability as well, especially when you think about blockchain development and the future growth of it. So I'm going to start with Anne. If you could emphasize maybe what sustainability means to you in the developer side or even in the blockchain ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about what does sustainability mean. I almost looked it up, but I didn't. I think what it means is, that you're consuming less value than you're producing, and hopefully what you're consuming is not a finite resource. So in blockchain, how do we get there with development? I mean, we need to make development easier, and we need to prove out our value. If we can do both those things, we'll become a more sustainable sort of system. And the other big aspect of sustainability, I think, is adaptability, because you might have a nice formula that works right now, but things are always changing. And we're in a great position right now in the blockchain world where we have so many projects. And that means we're very adaptive because you can throw projects away, create new ones, the churn happens, and that's how evolution works best, right? If we're able to throw things away, move people around, and grow. So.
Okay, awesome. And when you say throw things around, you mean create an MVP, see what works, see what doesn't, and then through that comes evolution.
Yeah, I mean even more at the, right, like we know we're in a very competitive space and sometimes that's stressful, but I think it's a good thing. And when one project dies, like the people who were working on it, they go to join on other projects or create new projects that are better. Like we have to be ready to, right, we're figuring this space out, so we have to not be too attached to our ideas unless they're really good.
And how does that currently apply to what you're building on maybe the research side of the development of Algorand as it's continuing to evolve and grow?
Well, I think one example of that is that we have a smart contract language that is currently good enough that Reach uses it as one side of the two main blockchains that they support, EVM style stuff and AVM style stuff. When I joined, it wasn't good enough for that, or it was barely good enough for that, and there were some serious problems. And so for a while, we thought we might have to throw it away and have a totally new layer 2 system that was completely separate from, almost completely separate from something that happened at layer 1. But instead, we sort of saw what worked. We picked the best ideas that we had from layer 2, and we've sort of slowly been moving them right into the layer 1 system, making it stronger and good enough to do the sorts of things that any high-level language like Reach needs in order to compile to. So in that case, we didn't quite have to throw something away, but we were ready to build on top of it and only use it as a substrate, arguably throwing it away if we needed to, in order to support what our users needed. As it turns out, fortunately, I think, our users are going to be just fine with taking the ideas that we were considering. So we've evolved the ideas instead of evolving away from the project. But the willingness was there to try something new if we needed to.
And how has that impacted the development of creating Reach and then making it compatible with the other virtual machines?
Yeah, sure. I want to kind of jump on something that Anne said, where she said that what it means to be sustainable is to consume fewer resources than you produce. And I think of that as like there's the cost and the benefit, right? Where if it currently costs $100 to make $101, then you're only getting a 1% return, which is really, really low. And so you can improve that situation by making it cost drastically less, and you can also improve it by making it be more useful. And so these are kind of the two big problems that we have. And when you look at various networks, so compare Ethereum and Algorand. If we look at something like launching an NFT on Ethereum costs on the order of, I don't know, I think right now about $60. And launching a similar NFT series, let's suppose that you're going to have like 10,000 of them, that costs on the order of like $5 or $6 on Algorand. And you're going to be able to do it much quicker. And if you were able to make it so that you weren't launching a whole bunch of individual assets, but you could instead do it as a single smart contract, then maybe it would actually cost maybe like 5 cents. And so from that perspective, what Algorand does, simply because of its lower cost of operation, means that it drastically lowers the cost of the actual deployment of something. And so when you think about one of these blockchain products, you want to think about where do those costs come in. There's like the development time costs, the deployment time costs, and then there's the ultimate utility that comes in. And the reason that I think that Algorand has been so exciting is that they have some of the cheapest deployment costs. And in particular, just right now, in fact, there's an upgrade going on of Algorand that's going to drastically increase the transactions per second, which in some sense is a way of lowering the cost, because if there were congestion on the network, then that higher TPS would mean that the congestion pricing wouldn't go in. And so what we're kind of focused on Reach is looking at those other two questions about lowering the developer cost and increasing the utility. Now, I have no idea how I can uniformly increase the utility of all blockchain programs, but I do know how I can decrease the development cost by making it so you can have fewer skills and get more work done. And the only way that we can do that is if we can provide a development platform that like a normal person can use, and they can still produce something amazing. And we can only do that if we have a powerful virtual machine that we can compile to. On the other side, about increasing the value of blockchain programs, as I said, I have no idea how to do this, but what I do believe is that the good ideas for how to do that will come from the next 50,000 people who are building on blockchain. And so I'm focused on trying to get those next 50,000 developers And that's, of course, what Nick's really focused on.
Yeah. Do you want to add on to that, Nick?
Yeah, so I love that he sort of transitioned that. He says that's actually what Nick's focused on, because that's exactly what we're focused on, is lowering the barrier for entry. I believe Ann said something earlier about making blockchain development easier. And that's a great way to say it, but I really shy away from the word easy, because if programming itself is not easy, add on top of that the special considerations that go along with Web3. The decentralized aspect, the fact that you can't maintain your code. You need to be very certain that your code is good as soon as you deploy it to the blockchain, right? And these are things that add to that barrier, so that when users come to us, they say, why do I want to learn this technology? Here's all these barriers that I have to get over. I could just use this instead. And that's where Reach comes in. That's where Reach comes in, because it feels familiar to a Web2 developer. And the tools and features that the Reach team have put into the language have lowered that barrier, so that a user who's experienced in Web 2 can walk in and look at a Reach program without ever having seen the code before and tell you what it's doing, right? Just based on the keywords, because it's familiar, it looks like JavaScript. And they have that opportunity to use the knowledge that they currently have and then apply it to blockchain, as opposed to going ground up and learning some new assembly level machine language that's difficult to write. If those are the users that we're relying on to take blockchain to the next level, that is a finite pool of users. That is a small pool of users. When we get into abstraction and getting away from the assembly level language and up into a language like Reach, where you can basically speak to it in English, I want A only to do this thing. That is how we lower the barrier for entry, and we help to teach our users about getting over those hurdles that come with Web3 programs. And those hurdles are a direct result of the features that we all love about blockchain, right? It's great because of this, but it also introduces new barriers because of this, right? So our job, and my job specifically, is about reducing those barriers and helping to teach our users that Web3 development can be similar to Web2 development. We can make that transition for you in 12 weeks, and you don't have to learn assembly language. And in my opinion, that's really how we get to that next set of users who build the next big thing for blockchain, right? That's really what we're doing here, is we're setting the stage for our users who already have a lot of skills to come to us and build that next killer blockchain application. And I think the last panel actually talked a little bit about it as well. But that next blockchain application is one that we're not talking about, oh, this application is great because it's on blockchain. No, it's a great application that uses blockchain, and the user doesn't need to know all of the technical details about that. That's really what we're after. That's that next step.
So I love that. Great answer. It sounds like what I'm hearing is like blockchain's the thing that's going to get us to the next thing. And currently, the way that I am seeing the blockchain ecosystem and the developers who are building on blockchain, a lot of the same applications are being built just on a different layer or a different blockchain in itself. So thinking about two different levels, lower levels of abstraction, sometimes the same smart contracts, Jay, you talk about this a lot, are being used, and that's kind of what the sort of, you can copy and paste and plug and play and create this wonderful application that works because it's already been done before, and you don't have to worry so much about the security risks of it. So brings me to my next question is, do we think that that's going to be the future of blockchain applications? Is it going to be just the same thing being molded in different ways? Or are we going to see new innovation happening from this sort of way that we're building because there are accessible entry points like the Reach platform? Or what do you foresee?
Let me give a tiny answer to this, which is that, for some context, right now on Ethereum, there are about 15 million active contracts. And 75% of those are copies of the same 15 programs. So that means that there's a very small number of programs where there's over 10 million copies of them on the Ethereum network right now. And so one vision of what blockchain is that, well, right now there's 10, 15 programs that matter, and we're just going to replicate them over and over again. And maybe the right number isn't 10, maybe the right number is 50. And that version of what blockchain is, I call that kind of like an infrastructure version of blockchain, where there's some really important infrastructure that the world runs on, like TCP kernel implementations and network drivers. There's a relatively small number of these, but they're really essential for how the world works. So one vision of blockchain is that it is a new kind of infrastructure where only experts need to get involved, and it could have an impact on the world. And another version is that it's more like the App Store where there's 2 million unique applications, and there's over I think right now on the Apple App Store there's something like 500,000 different companies with that have published an app.
How unique are they though? Right? I mean, how many marketplaces are there on the web? Like how many, and are they really different? Like, yeah, they have different lines of code, but so how do you actually measure that uniqueness?
So like, for example, if we take one domain like, like video game sellers, is Steam, GOG, Epic Game Store, Humble, do they count as different things? Or did we just say that like, okay, well, there's one idea and there's 5 implementations of that idea? If in general there was always 5 versions of everything, then that 2 million, we should just strike that down by 5.
Yeah.
Or maybe more.
Yeah.
I would certainly count each marketplace as surely it was written almost entirely separately. Surely they will have tackle similar problems, but they'll decide to do it a different way. So when I think about like business logic that exists in today's Web 2 applications, I would not say like I think we'll be done as soon as we get a few more of these things written. No one's going to need to write any more Web 2 apps. But I did like your analogy of TCP. There are probably only 4 or 5 TCP stacks that are in common use these days, maybe 10. And how many databases? Maybe 4 or 5 databases. So I think there will probably be some applications that are so common and people want to use the one that everyone recognizes as being thoroughly vetted. So I think that is true, but I do think people are always going to be right. If blockchains are going to succeed, they're going to succeed with people constantly writing more applications that tweak the parameters of a loan, right? And there's thousands of people banks put out loans and create customized products for individual transactions. They say, oh, you would like to borrow against your big block of IBM shares? We'll write you a note that says that as long as your IBM stock doesn't go below this number before this date. And so you might imagine these are just template forms, but they're all bespoke. And I think that's not because, it's because people want a bespoke contract. And so I think people will continue to make bespoke applications forever. If the blockchain's powerful, then people are going to keep building on it, not both on the front end and the back end. I think that's a distinction though that we're not making enough of, and I think it's maybe because Reach's vision, I think, tries to avoid this distinction. But let's at least admit that it exists at the beginning, and then we see if we can get rid of it. Web people tend to think of themselves either as front-end people or back-end people, although there is certainly a push to be a full-stack developer. I think you can think of a future where the back-end developer says, I'm a smart contract developer, or I'm the front end of the smart contract developer. And I suspect that the vast majority of the code will be on the front end, because in every large system I've ever looked at, the UI ends up consuming most of the code. However, perhaps the most important code, the code that has to be correct, the code that possibly has to be fast, in the old days it had to be fast, now it has to be efficient by other metrics, will be on the back end. And that's going to continue to be hard, I think. Harder, I think, to write than the front end. But I think you guys want to bring them together and sort of do it all at once, and that's a good way to handle that as well, perhaps. Give you a chance to say so.
My perspective is that in the applications that we've seen built on Reach, we see that same difference where 80% of the time and attention is spent on the front end. The question, though, is where's the cost allocated? And I think one of the things that's special is that if you look at traditional Web 2 programs, they may actually be 80% of the cost as well to produce the front end and give it the user experience that you want your users to have. But the problem is that right now, the back end of the Web 3 program, it actually tends to dominate the cost. So we've done some case studies of existing Web 3 programs that are out there, and we tend to find that they have about 10 times the cost to build compared to Web 2 backends. So a Web 2 backend might cost $10, whereas a Web 3 backend might cost $100. And so I feel that like when at Reach, we're not really focused on trying to make it so that the front end and the back end are somehow combined. We think of it more as we want to make it so that the Web 3 backend is as expensive as the Web 2 backend. That's sort of what our main goal is. And this idea that like that needs to be efficient, that needs to be well designed. So when I was a grad student at Brown, when I first showed up, I shared an office with this guy. And then when he graduated, he went and he worked at Google, and I stayed in contact with him. And he told me, I don't know how true this is, but he told me that his job is that he rewrites Python scripts into assembly. And he does this to lower the air conditioning budget. Now, he could be kind of joking, but that's effectively the way that he described what he was doing, because there was something where Google has such scale where if they can get a 5% return in the efficiency, then actually has a really big impact on their overall energy usage. And I think that thinking like this about where high margin returns are explains a lot about the blockchain world. So clearly the most popular network is Ethereum. It may not be the most popular currency, but it's the most popular smart contract platform. And given the very high prices of Ethereum programs, this means that there's a very large premium to making them more efficient, which I think encourages people in the Web3 world to be focused on low-level details like code writing and assembly. Furthermore, because there's so few transactions available on Ethereum and the price of them is bid up so high, that means that you can only do things that are worth spending $50 on the transaction. And I think that lots of the ways that people imagine blockchain to be useful are things where the margins are really, really small. And until we get to a more efficient network like Algorand, it won't be possible to actually realize those kinds of things. And so I think that this question about efficiency of cost, like this is sort of the, I don't know, if it's high-minded to think about sustainability, it's kind of low-minded to think about like, oh, let's like have operational efficiency in this business. But I think that they're actually kind of the same thing, and that's why in this conversation, that's where my mind goes.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because it also lowers the barrier to entry, making it more accessible for individuals to come in and deploy more contracts and have more innovation come through, because it's possible that someone in a different country who can't afford the $50, because maybe that's a month's salary, is not going to be able to deploy and build out the application they dream of. So I'm going to defer this question to you, JJ, because it seems like, Jay, you yourself have some similar viewpoints, but sometimes maybe a little opposing, thinking about you focus on low level and the development of the low level language on Algorand being teal. And so how do you think about the developer experience? Or I guess it's an and question as well. How do you think about what you're building out so that it makes sense for how Anne is showing it and sharing it with the world?
Yeah, I'll bow out after saying this, that in some sense, so I only think about enabling good developer experiences. I don't actually think about doing it. So in other words, if I'm told either by Jay or by someone else who's trying to build higher level things on top of our low level system, that they have a common sequence of operations that they need to do very often, or they're wasting space in a certain way, and they say, but I keep doing this over and over again, and I see that across Jay's work on Reach, and I see that across PyTeal, where we have what's called a medium level language, or I see it with, there's a guy who's trying to compile C# to AVM bytecode. If they're all having the same problem, I try to figure out what small set of primitives can be added, even if they have weird semantics, if they're small and can go fast, put that in there, and then it would be probably horrible for a user to actually program with that particular opcode, but it will allow people who are building the higher level languages, the nicer experiences, to use that opcode, and therefore people won't have to pay for that high level abstraction. And then you guys can take it from there.
Right. No, we have this specific discussion sometimes of, should we do this because it would make the developer experience better? You know, we could change something at the teal level, the lowest level. And then sometimes think, well, you know, it's something that will be easy to like abstract at the next highest level. So it's okay for us to focus on, you know, to choose the more efficient or, you know, maybe slightly less ergonomic option for that. Like we frequently have this discussion. But there are plenty of cases where like the decisions we make at the lowest level do impact all the way up. Like there's no way to change it. So we do think about it in that sense.
That's awesome. And low-level languages aren't completely eliminated even with the Reach platform because the output bytecode is going to be low-level language like Teal or Solidity. So how does that impact the developer experience, if at all?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways that it matters. So one way is that sometimes different platforms have unique benefits that you want to expose, that the user really wants to experience. So let me use a simple example. Right now, there are some people who are trying to launch a particular program using Reach on an Ethereum network. And they've been developing on Algorand because basically the development cycle is faster, but they ultimately want to launch on both. And so now they're to the point where they're ready to try the Ethereum one. And one of the things that Algorand has as a feature is this thing called an atomic transaction group. So what that means is that I can call Anne while simultaneously paying her USDC, or I can call Anne while simultaneously paying JJ USDC. And this is a feature that means that me as the user experience, I can have one signing dialogue and for both of these things. That's actually not possible on Ethereum networks because the way that non-network tokens like USDC work on Ethereum is that you actually have to call two different contracts. So I have to, generally the pattern is I first call the USDC contract and say, I'm allocating some money for Anne. Then I call Anne. And those two things can't happen atomically. And this user, they sent me a frantic email this morning. Something's going wrong. It's making me do two signings when I use Ethereum. And the answer is, that's just how it works there. And so this is interesting because it means that one of the downsides of a high-level language is that we pretend that the network works one way, and people get used to thinking that it works that way, but it doesn't really work that way. And so this is called a leaky abstraction. So a leaky abstraction is the idea, like an abstraction in general is removing yourself from the details and focusing on the high level. So for example, my favorite analogy, because I always have it on hand, is my wedding ring. So what is my wedding ring? Is my wedding ring a piece of platinum? Or is it millions of platinum atoms? Or is it up quarks and down quarks? Or is it a symbol of love? Each one of those things is a different level of abstraction. And sometimes it's necessary to think about one. And sometimes by focusing on the quarks, you actually lose the entire point of why I'm carrying around the wedding ring. And so a leaky abstraction is one where sometimes you want to focus on the high level, but sometimes you need to go underneath. And this example of seeing the atomic transaction, the lack of it be exposed, is kind of a danger. And so the more complex your application gets, sometimes you need to see underneath the cover, so to speak. And this shows up all the time, where people will write a program and they need to get they want to get the Reach program audited, but they also think that maybe we should audit the VM code also. Maybe they see an error on chain, and they need to translate that error back to the Reach code. So in the old days, when you got an error on Algorand, for instance, you would just get this message that says, error at program counter 79. And there was no way to figure out what that was. And then one of the things that JJ added recently, or someone on JJ's team added, is something that will say, oh, well, that PC 79, that goes to this line in the program. And so one of the things that we're working on in Reach is taking that line in the program and translating it again to the higher level Reach program. So that when there's an error on chain, we can say, line 17 of your JavaScript program errored. And so this is an example where the ultimate goal of a high-level language is to make it so that there are no leaky abstractions. And there's always difficulty in doing this.
I'm just going to take everything in for a moment. So Nick, I want to even extend this conversation to you because you came as a user of Reach and then eventually joined the team. But how has that impacted the way that you were building, especially thinking about code maybe a little differently as a software engineer, not necessarily a blockchain developer, because now there's a different sort of mentality in blockchain development. How has that changed for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting for me now in the seat that I'm in to talk about coordinating the Reach programs because I was a Reach user first. That was my first introduction, was to go into a Reach program and take the course. learn what the course had, and I did 2 of them at the same time, actually. I was doing 2 right next to each other while studying full-time, and it gave me a really unique perspective. And having so much background in general software engineering, right? When you take software engineering courses, they want you to learn every language in the book just about, right? Your first year, you do 10 different languages. And then I come to Reach, and I remember watching Jay do a 30-minute demonstration at the first session that I went to, and the thing that most stuck with me was how simple the user experience was. And I watched him say, export the Reach connector mode equals algo, and he hits the button, and then he says, well, what about Ethereum? And he turned, and one more line of code, and my jaw hit the floor. Because in my head, I knew what that took to go from where he was at to that low-level language on each isolated network. These are different networks. You would have to learn the infrastructure. You'd have to learn all the different pieces underneath of that, and the language itself, right? So what does that mean? That means you have to pick a corner early. If you want to write Algorand apps, you need to pick Algorand early so that you can learn the infrastructure, you can learn the language, you can work your way up, right? But then I watched him do this with Reach, where he's in the Reach corner, and the Reach corner extends to these different networks. And I understood what it was doing underneath the hood. And to me, that is what absolutely blew my mind about the user experience and where the future of blockchain development is going. Because if we have to ask our users to become very familiar with one specific language so they can use this one specific network, that is another barrier, right? If we can have sort of this language that can generally approach different networks, and now we're just talking about blockchain development, that is how we move to that next step, where no longer are we building, low-level machine code, right? We're actually adding features that you would not consider if you had to spend 6 months writing machine code, right? If you spend all of that time just to get the basic functionality down, and that's where your cost goes up, right? We talk about keeping the developer cost low. And you don't have to spend as much time building out those base features, so you can focus more on the advanced features of your application. And that's how we take it from sort of some of the clunky dApps that you see that are in existence today to that next level where the user doesn't know that that's what they're interacting with is this blockchain application. So that's a really long-winded way for me to say that coming to Reach from the user perspective and then transitioning to what do our users want puts me in a really unique position, because I sat in the seat where the user said, hey, I need to know about this. I have some experience in programming, but I don't understand this part about blockchain. And we've been able to sort of hone in on what that means for the user and spend a lot of time and effort there so that we can give them that base knowledge of these special considerations that go with Web3, but it doesn't take you a year to do, right? It takes you a much shorter amount of time because of that abstraction level. So yeah, I think that's another reason why I love my job so much, is because of the unique position that I sit in, having come from a user perspective. And I still think my jaw's on the floor from that demonstration they gave months ago.
Yeah, great answer, Nick. I want to bring it back a little bit to talking about how Web2 in itself, even the App Store, has X amount of applications, and a lot of them tend to be pretty similar, maybe just with a new brand over it. How do we sort of avoid that in the blockchain space so that there is more of a thought in innovation rather than it being a focus on repeating the same applications that people are going to be using? How do you think about that in Algorand and in what you do in your research?
I guess I have not worried about that. So I mean, let's talk about the real world. There are a lot of banks. If you walk down the street and you see 4 different banks, they're basically the same application, but with a different branding on it. And I don't think that's bad. That's fine. There's 4 banks, and they all do roughly the same thing. There's four grocery stores. There's lots of different TV channels. You can make a lot of categories that there are many examples of, and I don't mind that. I don't think there's a problem there. I guess if it leads to user, people talk about analysis paralysis, or the paradox of choice, where people are presented with a lot of things and they can't have to decide between them, that can sometimes lead to less engagement. So if it leads to that, then I think that will be unfortunate. But the only way it would lead to that is if there are so many people building on blockchain that users start to get confused. That sounds like it's probably a problem that's okay to have.
But you don't think we already have that? I mean, with like the different DeFi apps, like how are you supposed to choose between folks finance, AlgoFi.
Well, so I think when they're very, very similar, I think that the right answer is that you build something on top of them that if they present the exact same interface, that it's just a swap between tokens X and Y, whoever is giving me the best rate right now, I'll use that application. If they're different enough that they, I don't know, maybe one of them is a loan program where one of them allows you to participate in governance and one of them doesn't. Or one of them gives you a higher interest rate. Maybe one gives you a higher interest rate and one of them lets you participate in governance. So then you have to decide, well, which one do I think, which is more important to me? And I think it could happen that there's a real, I don't know, paradox of choice, but at this point, I don't think, it's not something that has worried me too much yet. But I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Does it worry you, Anne?
No, I think it's a feature to have more things, right? Competition breeds excellence. I don't know, there's some quote like that, right? So yeah, I think, and we see even within like the DeFi apps that are on Algorand, you know, they have some success, then another one has a little success, this one goes down, this, you know, they're figuring it out as a group. You know, if there was only one, it would not be pushed forward as quickly, right?
Yeah.
I'm more doom and gloom than I think JJ and Ann are. I'm very nervous about the lack of creativity on blockchain, because although there are quite a few DeFi apps that all have different trade-offs between them, the fact that most of them are DeFi apps is the thing that bothers me. For example, if I were to ask the question, so I have a younger sister, she's 22. What should she use blockchain for? Is there anything that she would care about? And if I search my soul and I wonder, Kennedy, what am I going to tell her to use blockchain for? The answer is, I don't know, maybe you could like take some throwaway money and gamble it on this token going up. She doesn't have enough capital for it to be useful for her to get like 1% returns being a liquidity provider in this little thing. Like that's not going to make a real big difference for her life. She doesn't care about the governance of the Algorand network. She doesn't care about the governance of the Uniswap network because those things have no impact on her. What she likes, she really likes TikTok. She really likes YouTube. She uses Rate My Professors to decide if professors are any good.
Okay, but if,
you know what I mean? She uses Facebook.
Yeah.
Like these are the things that she actually does on a day-to-day basis. None of them are on blockchain now. And so the big question that I have is for the future of blockchain is, can the things that Kennedy likes, could they be better with blockchain? Or could there be new things that are like the things that she likes? Could they come to existence and they don't exist now? Because, you know, when I was her age, there was no Facebook, there was no blockchain. Sorry, there was no TikTok. And I think that I would have liked them. I don't like them now, but I think that if I was her age, I would have liked them. And so what is the next thing that happens? And that is the thing that stresses me out. Because if all blockchain is DeFi, we don't need to have Tense and Quincy for that.
We are getting pretty close to time, so I kind of want to wrap it up and say thank you, one, for being here and sharing your knowledge with everyone today. But I also want to ask you, Nick, a little bit more about what's going on here in Boston. As we're closing out here in Quincy, there is a hackathon going on this weekend in Cambridge. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can. So Hack Boston starts today. Registration around 2 o'clock, I believe, today is the start for early registration. And we'll be hacking all weekend at the Soch building over in Harvard. I think it's 59 Shepherd Way. We were just there this morning. I actually remembered that. Yeah, and we have a lot of great partners that are involved. Talos is involved. FIO is here somewhere. And we'll be, over the next 36 hours, building out applications for each one of the networks. I know that Talos has a nice long list of applications that they would like to see built. So the idea is we're going to go and we're going to hack for 36 hours and see what applications we can build. I know I personally will be doing a couple workshops on Reach and a couple demonstrations on Reach. And this is not the first time, hopefully, that we've had users come in with no knowledge of Reach and we've been able to teach them some Reach here in a weekend and actually deploy an application that may win some prizes. So we're excited about it, and we'd love to have you join us, even if just for the workshops. If you're not a programmer, if you want to come see some cool workshops, join us.
I heard the word prizes. Are there prizes?
There are prizes, Jay. There was over $100,000 in prizes for different categories and for different applications from different networks. So a lot of big money on the table.
Is there a website? How do I find out more?
Hackboston.xyz. Of course.
Hackboston.xyz, cool.
Of course.
Yes. Thank you to Algorand, also a major sponsor for this event happening this evening. I want to ask, what sort of applications would you be excited to see coming from this hackathon?
Wow. Something besides DeFi, apparently support.
What, NFTs?
More NFTs?
Definitely. What animals haven't been built yet? Penguins, armadillos, I don't know. Something.
Come on, games. I'm waiting for, like, the games are starting, but where are the great games? I don't think they're quite here yet. I'm waiting.
I have a free idea. This is called Grandma Coin. I would like someone to build Grandma Coin for me. So Grandma Coin, you sit down for a meal and everybody stakes some money. And if they don't finish their plate, they lose their stake. Because when I was a kid, if I didn't finish my spaghetti and meatballs, my grandma would say, "You're going to eat the rest of that or you're not going to have a treat." And so I want to try to make a financial incentive for finishing your meal and not letting food go to waste. So Grandma Coin, that's what I want someone to build.
How do you prove that? You just like
We have a vote of everyone at the table.
Okay. It's got to be a consensus for everyone dining together.
We use a consensus algorithm.
Okay. Awesome. What about you, Nick? What do you want to see?
I think I'm going to build that, to be honest.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. That is all I have today.
Thanks, Steph.